Man, I'm too dumb to understand what the hell is going on, but I still think this shit is cute, so keep on going. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of June while I bleached my hair. Now you're probably wondering, why didn't you wait until after you bleach your hair before you film this video? Well, that's because this video is brought to you by Squarespace, which is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your own business. The thing about getting a video sponsored is that usually you agree on what day you're going to post a video beforehand, and it wasn't until I checked the contract that I realized I had to post this video literally this week. That is why we are filming in the middle of the night while I multitask. Squarespace is a platform that gives you so many unique features when you're building your own website. One of these features is providing powerful blogging tools to share stories, photos, videos, and updates so that you are able to categorize and share and schedule your posts to make your content work for you. They have so many beautiful templates that you can use whether you're making a blog, a podcast, an online store, a portfolio, whatever you want. You can head to squarespace.com/readwithcindy to get 10% off of your first website or domain using my code readwithcindy. Now let's move on to the rest of my June wrap up. All the books I read this month happen to have been written by or feature a character who is on the LGBT spectrum, which was actually not on purpose. I did plan on reading a couple of LGBT books this month, but I didn't plan on every single book to be gay, but you know what? You can't stop the gays. Anyway, for the sake of appearing woke, I'm gonna pretend like this was totally on purpose. The first book that I read this month was called I Don't Want to Die Poor, which is a series of essays that is compiled by an author who is dealing with a very common millennial crisis that many Americans deal with, which is student loans. It really sheds reality on how being in debt pretty much impacts everything from the way that he dates, from the way that he seeks medical care, if he even seeks medical care, the constant questioning of whether it was worth it for him to pursue this degree. If you're not from America, the way that the US education system works is whenever you go to college, you usually have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to even get to school. Most people cannot afford thousands of dollars in their tuition, so what they do instead is take out student loans, which is a contract where you essentially agree to get shafted up the asshole every year after you graduate until you die in crippling debt. It's a huge problem in America. I too was shafted up the ass. I had to pay over $100,000 in loans, and I've been one of the very, very lucky few who have been able to pay it off completely, but that is a total anomaly. You have to be extremely lucky and privileged to be able to get out of debt and have your butthole be released into freedom. And when I first shared how I paid off all my loans, a lot of people were kind of resentful about it, and honestly, I don't even blame them. It's such a corrupt institution and it's not fair at all, and it causes so much anxiety and stress in your life that I know if I was still on the other side, I would be a bitter bitch too. And you know who else is a bitter bitch? The author of this book. I listened to this book on audio, which he narrates himself, and I really enjoyed listening to his narration because he has this sarcastic, no bullshit manner of speaking that makes his writing feel more relatable. One of my favorite essays is the one where he dedicates it to his mother, and he describes his complicated feelings towards his parents and all of this silent anger that he has inherited from them and the guilt that he feels about how he'll never be able to repay her. I rate this book 3 stars because pretty much a similar reason to why I rate most collection of short stories or essays 3 stars. A lot of them tend to be inconsistent in terms of quality. I found that the essays in the second half were much stronger in the first half. By the way, I know people are going to judge me for the very informal way that I bleach my hair, but I don't have a brush, okay? So we gotta do what we gotta do. Don't judge me, okay? I'm just here to talk about the books that I read this month. This is an informational channel, okay? This is an educational channel. I already know so many people are gonna judge me for how I bleach my hair. Listen. Actually, I don't have an excuse. Go ahead and judge. The first half of the book kind of felt like throwaway content for some of the essays. Like they weren't as deep as I would have liked it to be. It kind of felt like he saved all the deep stuff and all the poignancy for the last third of the book. And I just would have liked him to be more consistent throughout, especially when he talks about his mom and all the complicated feelings he has about that. I feel like that's really juicy stuff to tap into, and there wasn't really much of an emotional stake until until the last third of the book. The next book that I read did a better job at providing that poignancy that I wanted though, because after that I read All Boys Aren't Blue, which is another memoir. It's a series of personal essays. He talks about all the lessons that he learned growing up as a Black gay boy. These lessons cover gender identity, toxic masculinity, brotherhood, structural marginalization, consent, all of that good stuff. I liked this one better because he was super personal just from the get-go. Kind of like how I'm being very personal with you right now by showing this side of me. Oh my god, I look bald. I rate this 4 stars. I just thought it was such a lovely short memoir because he really puts himself in this place as a mentor or like an older sibling that you can look up to. You can tell from the way that he narrates his audiobook that he is such a caring and compassionate person. And I really enjoyed hearing how much love he has for his family and his support network. I honestly really want to be his friend. Hopefully he doesn't watch this video though, because I think that would lower my chances. The main reason why I couldn't personally rate it 5 stars is really just like a personal preference. I kind of found a lot of his writing to be telling instead of showing. So I wish that he was a little bit more lyrical with the way that he explained stuff, because it was super straightforward to the point where it would like slap you in the face repeatedly. He would share anecdotes about his life and then he would go out of his way to explain what the story symbolized, which got kind of repetitive after a while. Like, I want to be able to process and immerse myself in what happened in a story instead of having it be spoon-fed. So in one of the early essays, he talks about how he found out that he actually has 2 names, and then his mom made him decide whether he wants to be called George or some other name. And so he was stuck between this dichotomy of these 2 names. Having that kind of pressure on him as a little kid was something that was reflective of later on when he was trying to figure out his own gender identity. I thought that was super interesting. But then he goes out of his way to be like, don't you see that this story from when I was 5 years old also symbolizes how people have to figure out their gender identity and work between 2 binaries that will define them? Don't you see that there is also another layer? Because when you decide to officially change your identity, so many people also change their names. Like, he would literally spell it out for you, and that's why it felt repetitive, because I kind of thought it was obvious what each story meant, and I didn't need another explanation on top of that slows down the pacing a little bit and it drags it by assuming that the reader is just going to take everything at face value. I feel like you can give a little bit more credit to the readers. Give them some time and space to immerse themselves in your story. Maybe because this is geared towards young adults or teenagers, maybe they need it more spelled out for them, but still, I feel like young adults are fairly smart, so I don't think that's necessary. After that, I switched over to fiction and I read The Library of the Unwritten. This is a fantasy series where basically when authors write books and they aren't able to finish their books, those unwritten books will reside in the Library of the Unwritten, which is located in hell. And it's up to the librarian to track down any characters from these unfinished stories who get restless and try to leave the book and try to wander around. The main character is named Claire, and she is a librarian who is in charge of repairing all of these old dusty books that never got published, but she also has to keep an eye out for any characters that try to escape the library. The story begins when a hero character escapes from his book and tries to search for his author. Claire has to track him and capture him down with a bunch of other characters because it's like an ensemble cast. There's like a demon and there's a fallen angel. There's a wide range of different types of characters. Obviously, there is a bigger plot at hand when the character escapes because there's this whole ordeal and power struggle between heaven and hell and the librarians and the authors and the books and the fictional characters. I thought this concept was really, really creative. I really loved the way that the author fully embraced this idea of storytelling and got super meta with all of the tropes. Like, it kind of poked fun at the character archetypes and the genres of different books. This happens pretty early on in the book where they explain how damaging it can be for a character to meet their author, because then that character will start to feel more alive to the author than anyone else they'll meet. So it basically just screws over the author for the rest of their life. Just imagine you're writing a story and then you meet someone who is just like your character and they feel so real that it's no longer fiction anymore, that has so many like weird weird implications and will kind of like fuck you up psychologically, especially because the author that wrote Hero obviously wrote him to be like a handsome, hunky dude. So when he meets her, you know, it kind of seems like a date, but that's even worse because he's basically gonna ruin real men for that author for the rest of her life. And that totally makes sense to me because fictional men are way better than men in real life. So I totally get why if I met a fictional guy, that would ruin me for all other dudes. Even though I really, really liked the creativity, unfortunately, I kind of fell in the middle with 3 stars for this book. I ended up finding that the pacing dragged a lot in a story that was already very dense. I feel like if you are into the idea of magical libraries, then you might really, really love it. But for me, it was super important for me to be into the characters, and I just wasn't. One of the main characters that you see a lot of is named Leto, and he's basically a demon slash teenager. He was this super annoying and angsty teen, and I could tell the story was trying to pigeonhole him into like this soft boy with a golden heart but has a tragic past, but I didn't give a shit about him whatsoever. There's like this big dramatic moment in the middle of the book where he does something. I'm not gonna say what it is because that would be spoilers, but it's like super dramatic, and then the main character is just screaming her head off like she's dying because she's so devastated by what he's decided to do. She's literally screaming like her soul is leaving her body, and I'm like, dude, you've known this guy for like 2 days. It's not that deep. The book also gets really, really campy, which will be a hit or miss for some people. It was a miss for me. There was a battle between the 2 librarians, and instead of it being like a normal battle with swords, it was like a battle for who was the biggest nerd who could quote the most pretentious stuff. Literally, it was 2 librarians face to face. They just shout quotes from famous books to each other, and if you don't know where the quote comes from, then you get hit with damage. But then if you do know where the quote comes from, then you're safe in the battle. And I'm like, this is the nerdiest fight scene I've ever read in my life. And they're like, oh no, I don't understand this reference. I get negative 10-point damage. And for those of you who are wondering how this book is LGBT, the main character is pansexual. Romance isn't really like a big part of the book. The romance that we did get to see was really weird. The protagonist has a female love interest, which was why I picked the book up in the first place, because I was like, ooh, I want to read more, you know, girl and girl romances, because I'm trying to figure out, you know, my own personal shit going on in my life, which I will not elaborate further, but this was definitely not the book for that. I can't say who the love interest is, but if you read it, that shit was weird. So unfortunately, the thing that I was most excited for wasn't even really like a thing that I was into. But you know what relationship I did like though? The next book that I read, which was This Is How You Lose the Time War. This is the book that I rated 5 whole stars this month because I ended up reading it literally 3 times. This is a sci-fi book that is about 2 rival agents who are on opposite sides of the war, and they are time travelers, and the only way that they can really communicate to each other is through letters. They're time traveling for their own respective armies, I guess, in the war, because their mission is to secure the best possible future for their warring factions, which is why they hop around time. The war still goes on for several centuries, but then they keep on writing letters to each other, and they start to have feelings for one another, and I just thought it was so juicy. Okay, I'm just gonna let the bleach sit on my hair and soak into my scalp since my brain cells are already gone anyway. But basically, I want to emphasize that I reread this book like 3 times, which is very, very rare for me. The moment I listened to the first chapter, I was like, whoa, this writing is so freaking good that I just need to listen to each chapter for the second time. Every time I finish a chapter, I would go all the way back to the beginning of the chapter just so that I could listen to it again and really savor the writing. And then halfway through the book, I ended up also borrowing the ebook so that I could digest the writing style with my eyeballs. This book probably has like the best writing that I've read all year because it was just so lyrical and abstract and interesting and unique. It's a very experimental book. I buddy read this with a couple of people, and basically everyone I buddy read it with was like, I have no idea what's going on in this story because they were so confused by the writing, but that was like why I liked the writing. It starts off as teasing and then you start to see the progression of them feeling super intensely for one another, and you're like, wait a fucking minute, what's going on? What's going on? Is this some gay shit going on? And even the way that they send the letters to each other changes every time, and it's so creative. Like there was this one part early on in the book, one of the agents writes their letter literally in the ridges of a tree that you wouldn't be able to find unless you chop that shit down. It took 10 years for her just to write down the messages in the ridges of the tree. And I'm like, bitch, that shit is peak yearning. That takes some dedication for you to write a whole ass letter for 10 years to your rival. Interesting. They tease each other, but they still intellectually stimulate one another. And I'm like, man, I'm too dumb to understand what the hell is going on, but I still think this shit is cute. So keep on going. I saved a couple of quotes just so that you know what I'm talking about and how intense they can be. I love you. I love you. I love you. I'll write it in waves, in skies, in my heart. You'll never see, but you will know. I'll be all the poets. I'll kill them all and take each one's place in return. And every time love's written in all the strands, it will be to you. P.S. I write to you in stings, but this is me, the truth of me, as I do so. Broken open by the act, in the palm of your hand, dying. These letters are so fucking extra. Hunger. To sate a hunger or to stoke it. To feel hunger as a furnace, to trace its edges like teeth. Is this a thing you singly know? Have you ever had a hunger that whetted itself on what you fed it, sharpened so keen and bright that it might split you open, break a new thing out? Sometimes I think that's what I have instead of friends. They get so intense with their letters where they're like, let me explain to you what hunger means. Let me show you in an overly descriptive paragraph about how I yearn and hunger and have that be a metaphor for love. I do think that it can feel kind of repetitive because it's basically the same format over and over. It just bounces back and forth with the same kind of letters, just in different places and settings and time periods each time. But I still really enjoyed it anyway because I was just so impressed by the creativity of layering all these different time periods. There's this twist that I thought was just super well done. It was a great way to tie everything together. Again, it's very, very rare for me to read something more than once or even twice. The writing was so good that I had to read it 3 times. After that, I read a contemporary YA called Clap When You Land, and this was originally not on my TBR, but I ended up adding it because I made a joke with one of my friends. I told her that I was gonna read a book called Clap Your Ass Cheeks When You Land, and she thought that was the actual title, so she was looking it up in her library and she couldn't find it. She was like, Cindy, I can't find the book Clap Your Ass Cheeks When You Land. It doesn't look like it's in my library. And I'm like, no, that's not the actual title, but you know what? I feel kind of bad for making you go through that, so I'll actually read the actual book with you. This is a book that follows 2 girls who live on opposite sides of the world, but they share one common element, which is that their dad went on a plane and then the plane crashed, and that, you know, really fucking sucks. That's the basic synopsis. That was a terrible synopsis. Okay, let me try it again. One girl lives in the Dominican Republic. The other girl lives in New York City. They have never met each other at all. They don't even know about each other. Their dad went on this plane that ended up crashing. And so you follow both of the girls' individual journeys as they deal with the grief that happens when you lose your father in a tragic accident, and also the ramifications, what happens because they find out secrets about their dad that they didn't know before. The book explores themes of grief and cultural differences and family. It covers a little bit of sexual harassment that goes on in the Dominican Republic. Basically a lot of topics that young girls, especially young women of color, deal with. If you like spoken poetry, I think you will like this book because she narrates everything super passionately and poetically. I'm like, yes, bitch, tell me more about the mud outside of your home so that you can make a metaphor out of your Dominican childhood. Tell me more about the soil beneath your feet and how it reflects the roots of your childhood. Just keep all these metaphors coming, man, because I love it. I rated this 4 stars because the writing was so lovely, and I do think it's a good coming of age story. I personally would have enjoyed a deeper exploration of grief and the way that the girls both kind of grapple with the complexities of their family stories. Their family dynamics is a lot to sort out, but we didn't really get to sort it out as much as I wanted to. Another thing is I felt like the voices between both the two main protagonists were really similar to one another, to the point where it became difficult for me to keep track of who was speaking. I read the author's note after the end of the book where she reveals that when she first wrote the book, she only wrote it from one perspective, and then it wasn't until her agent suggested her to write from two perspectives of the main character and the other girl across the world from her that she decided to split it into two. And once I read that author's note, it made a lot more sense to me why the protagonist didn't feel distinctive enough. You could tell that she kind of just wrote it from one perspective in the beginning, and then she decided later to split it into two. Especially because the situations between the two girls, obviously they have that similarity with their dad, you know, crashing down a plane, but their childhoods and their upbringings are so different, and each person deals with grief very differently. So I would have liked to see more distinction between the two, because their voices and the way that they process grief were kind of similar, and I do think it would have been more useful for the author to do a second pass to make sure that the protagonists more so contrasted with one another. And then the last book that I read for this month is The Vanishing Half. This is the second novel this month that I rated 5 stars. This is a literary and historical novel that follows two twin sisters. They grew up in this small town. Everyone in the small town is black, but they try to have really, really light skin. And so with each generation, they try to dilute the darkness as much as they can. So the twin sisters that we follow in this book are both technically black, but they can be white passing. And then these twin sisters end up separating and living different lives. One of them lives a life where they pretty much embrace their blackness, and then the other tries very, very, very hard to be white passing and basically lives as a white woman. They both have children, and then we follow those daughters as well and how their lives become different. So that's like 2 or 3 generations of people across different states, all dealing with their own versions of internalized racism. I didn't know how I would feel about it because in the first third of the book, it was really, really slow. But once I started to see how the 2 generations diverged and how they connected later on, that's when I really became invested, because I started to see how each person's individual journeys were so different from one another. It was really interesting to see how each characters dealt with things like their race, or their loneliness, or colorism, or abuse, or motherhood, or just like this sense of identity, if they even have a sense of identity. Not only did I really like reading about the women that we get to follow throughout their life journeys, I also really, really liked the male side characters, particularly this one side character named Reese. He's actually the reason why this book is categorized as LGBT, because he is the love interest for one of the main characters, and he is transgender. And I loved the fact that that part of him wasn't like the main focus or the main drama of the story. It was just like a part of his identity. I love that dude. I want to marry him. He's so manly, but so soft. So he's like my ideal type of man. I too would travel the world with him, and I'll pay for any of his surgeries as long as he holds me in his manly, strong arms. But anyway, we're getting off tangent. Back to the main characters. One of the characters who has rejected her blackness and tries to pass off as a white woman, she has so many issues. Oh my fucking God. The internalized racism runs so deep. Like, I get it because it's a form of self-preservation, but she goes so fucking extreme. She doesn't even hire black people, and she doesn't even want black friends because she's afraid that if she has black friends, then they'll see her for who she really is. When she marries this white dude and she has a baby with him, she's so scared that the baby's gonna turn out darker skinned that she makes this plan to think, okay, if the baby turns out to be dark skinned, I'm gonna pretend that I had an affair with a black man because that's better than letting my husband know that I'm actually black. And I'm like, bitch, please get therapy like the rest of us. Even though I don't think this is a perfect book, because sometimes like the timeline kind of jumps around a little bit and the ending isn't as satisfactory as I would like it to be. Despite all of that, I still am so impressed with what the author has pulled off. She made you go through 4 different lifetimes of 2 to 3 generations of women, and that's just super impressive. So I gotta give props to her because she covered so many different themes of race and identity. So it was a pretty solid reading month. And then for the month of July, I plan on reading Tell the Truth and Shame the Devil. I actually started reading it already. I just haven't finished it yet because it's just so depressing that I'm not rushing to finish it. I'll also be covering Dear Girls by Ali Wong, Middle Game by Shauna McGuire, We Set the Dark on Fire, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and There Will Come a Darkness. If you made it this far, thanks for joining me as I got high off of Bleach. Go ahead and unsubscribe from my channel, and goodbye.